If you want to learn web design, but you've never written a line of code in your life, then start here. In this course, you're going to learn from the absolute beginning how to work with HTML. You're going to learn exactly what HTML is and how it relates to a web browser. You're going to learn how HTML elements make up websites. You're going to learn how HTML tags make up HTML elements. You're going to learn about HTML attributes, and we're going to shortcut getting you to the point where you can create really good websites by showing you the most common HTML elements. And then you're going to take everything that you've learned throughout the course and you're going to make your own basic web page from scratch. So even if you have absolutely no experience with coding whatsoever, by the end of this course, you will know all the most important things about coding HTML. So let's go ahead and start here and learn HTML basics. I'll see you in the first lesson. Hi, my name's Kez Bracey for Tuts Plus. Welcome to the first lesson of Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. In this lesson, we're going to start at the very beginning, and that's with a quick rundown of what HTML actually is. So the actual term HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Now the key word in there is markup. So HTML is a type of markup language. So then your next question is going to be, well, what is markup? Markup is basically some extra information that you can add to content or to data or other types of information to give instructions on how it should be presented or how it should be otherwise used. So this is probably most easily understood by seeing in action. On the left here, you've got a pretty standard HTML page. Now don't worry too much about understanding what you're seeing here. We're going to go through everything in detail in the subsequent lessons, but I just want to show you some of the effects that you have by using different types of markup, different types of HTML. All right, now this document here, this is an HTML document, and it's being viewed inside the Chrome browser, and this is what we're seeing. Now, an HTML document is basically just a text file that has the file extension either .html or .htm. And you can view any HTML file in any browser in kind of the same way that you would view a Word document in Word, for example. And we have this text here in our HTML document is appearing up here in our web browser. Now, around this sentence, we have some HTML, some markup. Now, if we change that markup, we can change the instructions that are given to the browser and hence the appearance of our text here. So let's see some examples. Right now, we've got this text marked up as a medium-sized heading, but we can change that to be marked up as a different size heading. So that increases the size of the text. And we can change the markup again so that instead of being a heading at all, it becomes a paragraph. Or we could change the markup again, and instead of it being a heading or a paragraph, we can turn it into a bullet list. So by changing the type of HTML, the type of markup that you use with your content, you give different instructions to a web browser on how your content should be displayed. So the process of learning HTML is just a matter of learning which markup is going to give what instructions to the browser so you can make your web pages look the way that you want them to. And there are all different kinds of HTML, different kinds of markup that are available to create all different types of results in a browser window. You can control text display, image display, how things are organized into sections, links, and all different types of stuff. And you're going to start learning how all of that works in the next lesson, where we go through the fundamental building blocks of HTML, and that is HTML elements. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Hey, welcome back to Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. In the last lesson, we went through what HTML actually is. And in this lesson, we're going to go through the most essential building blocks of HTML, and that is HTML elements. Now, every website is made up of a series of HTML elements. And there are all different kinds of HTML elements. Now, as you go through learning web design, one of the most useful tools that you have at your disposal is the inspector in either Chrome or Firefox. So we're going to use that to have a look at some of the elements that make up tutsplus.com. So right here, we have a heading element. Now let's take a closer look at that element. So we'll right-click it and choose Inspect. And then our Chrome Web Developer tools open up. And right here, you can see that this is our heading element. And as you go through all of this code, there are multiple different types of elements. And you can tell what type of element something is by looking at the word or just the characters that are immediately after this less than sign here. And we're going to go into the structure of this code that you're looking at a little bit more closely in the next lesson. So don't worry if you don't understand this completely just yet. But looking through this code here, if we just highlight these first words, what you can see in this window are div elements, an image element, an H1 element, a paragraph element, a main element, a footer element, and a script element. So just look for that first word and that will tell you what type of element you're looking at. So let's have a look at another one. Right here, we have an image element. So we'll inspect that. And you can see here, we have this little segment of code, and that is our image element. Now let's go into this tutorial. Now if we have a look here, here's another element. This is a paragraph element. So I'm going to grab this selector here to take a closer look at it. And there, if we have a look in our code, we can see our paragraph element. So all websites are built up of these discrete little chunks of content. So as you start to learn HTML, you'll want to start familiarizing yourself with the most commonly used types of elements. Now there are quite a lot of elements, but to begin with, you'll only need to know about a fraction of them. And for your purposes at this stage, there's really only 3 different categories of elements that you need to think about. One is the elements that allow you to put content onto your page. Things like our paragraph element here that allows you to put a paragraph of text on a page. Or up here, a heading element to allow you to put a heading on the page. Or over here, an image element so that you can put an image onto the page. And then to organize all of your content-related elements, you also need structure elements. You need to be able to group up different sets of content into areas on a page so that you can lay them out, and also so that when search engines come to your site, they know which parts of your site are the main content and which parts are extra bits and pieces like headers and sidebars. So for example, if we select the main area of our content in this page, you can see here we have a main element. So that's helping to organize all of this content. And then right down the bottom, we've got our footer. And you can see here, this is our footer element. So those are a couple of examples of structuring elements that you can use to organize all of your content elements. And then the third main category of element that you're going to want to know about as you're getting started are document metadata elements. And these are elements that provide extra information about the overall page itself. Now, one example of this is the title element. Now, up here in the tab of our browser window, you can see that we have a page title, JavaScript ES6 Fundamentals, Envato Tuts Plus course. Now, that title isn't anywhere on the visible page here. It doesn't come from any of the content elements that we had to look through, and it also doesn't come from any of the structure elements. So where does it come from? It comes from the title element. Now I'll show you the title element in the code. And right here, this is our title. And then you can see above and below it, there are quite a few other elements that are also providing metadata for the document. So we've got several link elements, and these are used to link in external resources like CSS style sheets, or in the case of the link element that we're looking at here, this loads in the favicon that shows up in our tab here. And then we've also got elements like the meta element. And that can be used for all different kinds of things, like giving instructions to mobile devices on how things should be displayed, or helping you integrate Google Analytics, like the element that we're looking at here. So once again, don't worry too much about the intricate detail of all of these elements that we've just gone through, because we're going to go into things more closely in the next couple of lessons. The main thing that I want you to remember out of this is these 3 different types of elements. You've got your content elements for helping you put text and image and videos onto a page. You've got your structure elements for helping you group and organize those content elements. And then you've got your document metadata, which is a bunch of stuff that is not visible in the main body of your website, but it helps to provide extra information about your site and add some extra functionality. So now that you know what HTML elements are, the building blocks that make up websites, you're ready to learn how to create HTML elements. Now, the way that you create HTML elements is with tags. So in the next lesson, you're going to learn about what HTML tags are, how to use them, and the difference between opening tags, closing tags, and void tags. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Hi, welcome back to Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. In this lesson, you're going to learn what HTML tags are. You're going to learn how to use them, and you're going to learn the difference between a couple of different types of tags. So far, you've learned that HTML is a type of markup language that you use to give instructions to a web browser, and you've learned that websites are made up of multiple HTML elements. Now, the way that you create HTML elements is by using HTML tags. With the previous lessons, you've mostly just been watching and getting a grasp on the theoretical foundation, but for this, I want you to follow along with what we're doing here. Now, we mentioned earlier on that an HTML file is just a text file with a certain type of file extension, .htm or .html. So that means you can edit an HTML file in any text editor. So it can be Notepad or anything else. But it's going to make your life a lot easier if you use a custom-built code editor like the one you see on the left side of your screen here. Now, this one is called Sublime Text 3, and you can download it here if you want to use the same editor that I'm using. And one of the main reasons that it's going to be easier for you if you use an editor like this is you can see that we've got multiple different colors in the text here. If you just use a plain text editor, everything is just going to be black text on a white background. But with a dedicated coding editor, you'll have highlighting, and it will help your code to be more readable and easier to follow. Now, as for the code that you see here, this part here and this part here, just ignore it. I don't want you to actually worry about trying to make your results show up in a browser here. I've just got this up here as a demonstration so you can see what we're actually working on as we step through. But what I want you to really focus on is just getting the hang of working with tags, typing them out, and seeing what the syntax is like that you're going to be working with. So just grab yourself a download of Sublime Text 3 and just go to File, New File, and then just type into the empty space here. That's all you really need to do to follow along with what we're going to be doing. All right, now most HTML elements are made up of 2 tags. They're made up of an opening tag and a closing tag. And then you'll put some content in between those opening and closing tags. Now, let's look at an example. Let's say we want to make a paragraph of text. In order to do that, the first thing we need to establish is what type of element we want to use. Now, I'll give you a reference for where you can look up all the different types of HTML elements that are available. But in this case, I'll just let you know that a paragraph element is created by using a p tag. Now, all HTML tags are wrapped in less than signs and greater than signs. So to create our paragraph element, we're going to start with an opening p tag. So we'll insert a less than sign, then we'll type in a p to create our p tag, and then we'll wrap that off with a greater than sign. Now that is our opening p tag. Now we need a closing p tag. Now the only difference between an opening tag and a closing tag is a closing tag has a / inside it. Now, this is going to look a little weird because Sublime Text has an autocomplete function, which just makes it quicker and easier to write your code. So we're going to put in a less than sign, and this time we'll add our closing /, and then you'll see Sublime Text finish off the rest of the tag. So both the opening tag and the closing tag have the same thing in them. They have the p to create the paragraph element. And then the only difference between the two is this / here that says this is where this element ends. And then you can put some content in between the 2 tags to finish creating your element. And there's our paragraph element up here in our website. Now, once again, don't worry about trying to make your code show up in a browser just yet. We'll go through that in a later video. So let's try another one. This time, let's create a large heading. And we're going to create an H1 element. So we'll use a less than sign. And then we'll add in our H1. And then we'll use a greater than sign to finish that opening tag. Now we'll add our closing H1 tag with a less than sign, a /, and then we're just using the same thing again here, another H1, and then another greater than sign. And then in between the two tags, we add our content. Now, whenever you have an opening and a closing tag, you're going to have something in between those two tags. There are some exceptions, but don't worry too much about that right now. Generally speaking, the rule is whenever you have the opening and closing tags, you need to have something in between them. However, there is another type of tag called a void tag. Our void tag just sits by itself. It doesn't need to have a closing tag, and it doesn't need to have any content in between tags. An example of this is an image tag. Now, in the same folder that I have my index.html file that I'm working on, I also have an image, dog.jpg. I'm going to create an image element using an image tag to load that image into this site. So just like before, I'm going to have a less than and greater than sign. And inside that, I'm going to have the tag that you need to use for an image element, which is img. And now I just need to tell the system where the image is that I want to load in. And that is my completed tag. Now, an image tag is different to the tags that we just looked at because it doesn't need to have a closing tag. You don't actually ever need to do this. This closing tag does not exist in valid HTML. So we'll get rid of that. Now I'll just save that so you can see the result in the web page. And there's our dog image. So now some of the other tags that you're seeing in this code might start to make a little bit more sense. So we've got an opening and closing tag for our title element here. We've got opening and closing head tags, opening and closing body tags, opening and closing HTML tags. And we're going to go into more detail on what each one of those tags and those elements is responsible for in a later lesson. So when you know that you want to create a certain HTML element, go and find out what its tags are. Find out what the text is that you need to include in the tags. Find out if it has opening and closing tags, or if it's a void tag that just sits by itself. Now you will have noticed that when we created our image tag, we did something a little bit differently. With our heading and paragraph tags, all we did was just include the basic characters that we needed to specify what type of element we were creating. But with our image tag, we also added this text here. And that's because a lot of times, just the default tag by itself is not going to be enough to give you what you need. If this image tag didn't have this extra text here, the browser would have no way of knowing which image you want it to show up. And what this is an attribute. So in the next lesson, you're going to learn about what HTML attributes are and what the effect of using them with different elements is. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hey, welcome back to Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. Let's quickly go over what we've learned so far. We've learned that HTML is a type of markup that you use to give instructions to a web browser. We've learned that pages are made up of HTML elements, and the HTML elements are created by putting together HTML tags. We also learned that you can have sets of opening and closing tags, and that you can have standalone void tags. Now, in the last lesson, you also saw how on top of just the tags themselves, we added in some extra information. Now, what we added in there is called an attribute. Now, attributes add extra functionality to HTML elements. So let's look at the attribute that we've added to our image element here. Now, attributes always follow the same structure. You always have a space after the actual tag name. Then you have the attribute name, an equal sign, a set of talking marks, and then you have the value. So you have space, attribute, equals, value in talking marks. And you can have multiple attributes per tag, and you just have to have a space in between each attribute. Now let's add another attribute into our image tag. Now what you're going to want to do is have a reference handy to all the different HTML elements you have at your disposal. Now I personally like the Mozilla Developer Network reference, but you can also use the w3.org reference, and I'll give you links to both of those. Now down the left side here, we have a full list of all the HTML elements that are available for use in the current version of HTML. So if we go through alphabetically, we can find our image element. Now we can go into the extra information for that element, and if we scroll down, here we can find a list of all the attributes that can be used with the image element. Now every element is different. Every element has different attributes that you can use along with it. And a reference like this, you'll find out what those attributes are. And we already used the source attribute. And this gives us a description of what that attribute does. In this case, that just provides the address of the image file that you want to load into your image element. Now let's choose another attribute to use. We're going to also add the alt attribute. Now alt is short for alternative. Now you can use this attribute to give some type of fallback in case for whatever reason a visitor is not able to see the image. We can put some text as the value of this alt attribute to describe the image so that if a person can't see the image, they still know roughly what was supposed to be there. So we'll go back into our HTML. We have our space after our last attribute, and now we're going to type in our new attribute. We're going to say equals, and we're going to add some talking marks. And then in between the two, we'll put our new value, and we'll add some descriptive text of the image. So now let's see what happens if this image doesn't load. We'll just deliberately misspell the name of the file. So now there's our alt text acting as a fallback. Now let's try another example of working with an attribute on an HTML tag. So we'll just undo that change we made. Now we're going to add a link to one of our words that we have in our paragraph here. So let's add in a new element. Now the element that we're going to use to create a link is the A element. So we'll check out our reference. Here's our A element. And this tells us that this creates an HTML anchor or a link. And down here we have our attributes. And we can see that you need to use an href attribute to specify the URL that we want this anchor, this link, to go to. So let's add that into our code. So we'll add our opening tag, and we'll add our closing tag. We'll add some text inside it, and we're going to make this link to Google. So we'll just put in the word Google. Let's make a little space here. Now we need to add our href attribute so that we know where the link needs to connect to. So we'll make a space. We'll put in our href attribute. We'll set equals and put in our talking marks. And then in between the talking marks, we're going to put the URL of Google. So we'll put http www.google.com. So now here is our link. And if we click that, that takes us through to Google. So now we're gradually building up our process. You know that to create the markup required for a web browser, you need to piece together HTML elements, and that you do that with HTML tags that also use HTML attributes. Now those concepts are actually the complete foundation for all of the web design that you will do for the rest of your career. No matter how complex and in-depth everything gets, it's all going to be comprised of those exact same steps. So all you need to do is know where to look to find the correct reference material to learn how to follow those steps as you piece together your websites. Now you will have seen in this reference that there are quite a few different HTML elements. And most of these you really won't use very often at all. Most of these are actually fairly edge case. There's only a handful that you're going to use in all of your projects. So in the next lesson, we're going to cover what those common elements are and the role that they play in websites. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Hey, welcome back to Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. Now, so far you've learned that websites are made up of a bunch of different HTML elements that you piece together. And you've also seen that there are quite a few of these HTML elements that you can choose from. However, in practice, you'll only find that there are a handful of these elements that you'll use in pretty much every project. You will use lots of smaller use case elements, but for the most part, if you're familiar with these most common elements, you'll be pretty well equipped to make all kinds of websites. And we're going to go through what these common HTML elements are in this lesson. I'm going to keep this pretty quick because in the lesson after this, you're actually going to go through and code up a web page with the elements that we'll be talking about here. And it's always easier to wrap your head around something by actually doing it yourself. But I just want to give you a quick overview so when we move into coding, you'll already be a little bit familiar with the elements that you're working with, and so that you have this here as a reference to these elements that you should get to know before all of the other elements. Now, you remember earlier that I said the three main categories of element that you're going to want to start looking into are elements for metadata, content, and structure. Now, that's true, but there is also an extra type of element that you'll use in every single project that you create. And I like to think of those elements as the essential elements. Now, without these elements, a web page just won't work. These four elements have to be included in every single web page that you make. So first up, we have the doc type, which tells the browser what type of HTML you're writing. We have the HTML element, and all of the rest of the code that you write is going to be nested inside this HTML element. So the HTML element holds all of your HTML. Then inside your HTML element, you have two sections. You have the head section, and the head section holds all of your metadata. Then you have the body section, and the body section holds all of your structure and content elements. Now, as I said, don't worry too much about trying to memorize everything that I'm telling you here or understand it too deeply because we'll move on to using these practically in the next lesson. Now, with your metadata that is included in the head section, you're going to be working with these three elements primarily. You have the title, or you set the title for the web page, and that will appear in the tab that your web page is being viewed through. You have the meta element, which allows you to provide all kinds of extra information about your web page. And then you have the link element, which allows you to create links between this document and other types of documents, like CSS style sheets, for example. For structure, you'll primarily work with these 6 elements. You have the header element, which is typically where you'll find some type of heading that tells you what the whole page is about and possibly some menu items. You have the footer element, which will generally include things like a copyright message or some information about the creators of the website or the owners of the website. You have the main element, which lets you indicate which portion of your HTML is the main content of the site. You have the section element, which allows you to organize your content into discrete little packets. The aside element basically lets you attach information that is relevant to a certain part of your content, but rather than being contained in the content itself is more logically placed as an extra attachment. And then you have the div element, which is essentially just a generic organizational element. And because it is generic, you'll typically only use it when you need to control layout or you need to control the styling of a section of your site. And then finally, for our content elements, we have our heading tags. And there are 6 different types of heading tags. You have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. And typically the H1 tag will give you the largest sized heading, and the H6 tag will give you the smallest sized heading. But on top of just how the headings look, An H1 heading will be the main heading for a certain section in your site. Then the H2 heading will be a subheading below that. The H3 will be a subheading below that again, and so on all the way through to H6. Then we have the P tag, which allows you to create paragraphs of text. We have the image or IMG tag, which allows you to embed images into your pages. We have the unordered list or UL tag, which is used to create bullet lists. The OL or ordered list tag, which lets you create numbered lists. And then you have the li or list item tag that you use to create list items within either an unordered or ordered list. So as you start to practice writing HTML, keep coming back to this list of elements and practicing different ways that you can work with them. And this will give you a really excellent foundation that will give you a lot of different things that you can create, and then you can build on these elements by learning extra elements when you're ready. All right, so now we're ready to start putting this into action. In the next lesson, you're going to hand code a complete HTML page from scratch. We're going to take everything that you've learned so far. We're going to take all of these elements that we've just gone through, and you're going to code up an HTML page all the way from the beginning. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Hi, and welcome back to Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. In this lesson, you're going to create your own HTML document from scratch. So let's jump in. Now with Sublime Text open, I want you to go up to File, and then create a new file. And then go up to File and save that file somewhere that you can find it easily as index.html. Now go into the folder that you have saved your HTML file into. Now inside the source files that go along with this course, you're going to find a file named style.css and an image named html.png. And we're going to be using both of these in our code. So to make them available for the page that you're creating, just paste them into your folder. Now you can open up your HTML file in whatever your preferred browser is, and then as you're making your changes to your code, you can refresh the page and you can see your progress. All right, so here we have our empty index.html document on the left, and we're viewing it in Chrome browser on the right. So let's begin with the first stage, and that is adding in our essential HTML tags. Now the first thing that we're going to need is a doc type. So just like we did when we were introducing tags in a previous lesson, we're going to start with our less than sign. For a doc type, we're going to add an exclamation mark. Then in all capital letters, we're going to add doc type. Then we're going to make a space and put HTML and then close off the tag. Now what this does is tell the browser that the version of HTML that we're working with is HTML5. Now as the name suggests, there have been 4 versions of HTML before this. So the doc type is a pretty simple tag now, but in the past you used to have to put in all different kinds of attributes depending on how you were coding up your HTML. But lucky for you, you're starting with HTML5, and all you need to do with your doc type is put in this code at the start of every one of your documents. Now we need to add in our HTML element, and this is going to wrap all the rest of our code. So we'll add our opening HTML tag, and then we'll close it off, and then we'll just make some space for the code that's going to come in between these. Now we need to add an attribute here to specify the language of the page that we're creating. For our purposes, this is going to be English, so we're going to put lang equals en. Now we just need to add in the last 2 of these essential elements, and that is the head section and the body section. So inside our HTML element, we'll add our head, and then underneath that, we'll add our body. And then just make some space inside both of those. Now save what you have, and that is all of your essential HTML. These are the things that you must include in every web page. So now we can move on to the metadata. Now all the metadata goes into the head section. So first, let's add a meta element, and we're going to add one that's going to specify the character set that this web page should be using. So we're going to add meta, and then we're going to put char set. That's probably not how you're supposed to say it, but I always think of this as char set. It probably should be char set or something. But anyway, set that to equal UTF-8. And there are different types of character sets that you can use with websites, but you will probably never have to use them in your career. But you will need to include this UTF-8 setting in all of your pages. All right, next up, let's add a title element. Now let's give our web page a title. we'll just set it to be Learn HTML Basics. Now, if you save and then you watch up here in the tab of your browser, you should see your title will appear. So there it is up there. There's our page title. And now the last tag that we're going to add to our head section is a link tag. And we're going to use this link tag to connect the style.css file that you pasted into your folder earlier on. Now we're going to get into working with CSS in the courses that come after this one. So don't worry too much about what's in that CSS file right now. Basically, all it's going to do is, instead of having the content of the page that you're working on stretch out all the way across the viewport, it's just going to crunch it in to be a little bit more narrow so it's a little bit easier for you to work with, and it's just going to center it on the page. So we'll add link. Now here, if you're working with Sublime Text, you can just press Tab and it's going to auto-complete this tag for you. And now you can add in the name of the style sheet that you're linking in, which is style.css. And you'll note here that Sublime Text has put in a couple of extra attributes for us. It's put in rel equals style sheet, which says that the relationship between this page and this external CSS file is that it is a style sheet to be applied to this document, and that the type of the file is text or CSS. All right, now you can save that again. And that is your metadata now complete. So let's move on to adding in our structure HTML. Now the first thing that we're going to do is add in a div. Now if you remember from the last lesson, a div is just a generic type of structuring element, and you typically use it to control layout or presentation. And we're going to use this div to apply some of the style from our style sheet to give that centered, narrow layout that I mentioned just a moment ago. So first we'll add our div element, and this should all go inside the body tag from now. So your head section is finished. Now everything else is going to go in the body tag. So we'll add our div, make some space inside, and now to apply some of the styling from our style sheet, we're going to add a class attribute. Now the class attribute will allow you to specify a class name, and then the browser will go and try to find that matching class name inside your CSS, and it will apply whatever styling it finds under that class name. And once again, we are going to go into CSS in more detail in subsequent courses, so don't worry too much if you don't fully understand that just yet. For now, just add in the attribute class and set it to equal wrapper. All right, now inside our div, we're going to lay out all of our structure before we fill the structure out with content afterwards. So first we're going to need a header for our page. So we'll add that in just like that. Now underneath the header, we're going to need a main section. There's our main section. And we're going to need a footer. Now inside our main element, we're going to split up the content that's going to be in here. We're going to have two sections for the most important content, and then we're going to have an aside for some secondary, less important, but still relevant content. So we'll add in two sections. And then below that, we'll add an aside. All right, so now all of your structure is laid out. You've got everything set up here and ready for content to be added in. Now, also along with the source files that you have access to as part of this course, you should find this text file. And this file gives you all of the content that we're going to be putting into our HTML. So just to save your typing, you can just copy and paste straight from here. All right, so first let's put in an H1 level heading into our header section. So we'll add in H1. Now let's grab up here the text for our heading and we'll paste that in. Now let's see how that looks. So there we have our H1 heading. Now let's start to add in our main content. Now in this first section, we want to create a subheading. So let's set up an H2 level heading. And from here, you can copy over this text here. And now we're going to create an ordered list. So a numbered list that outlines the process we're going through right now. So first we'll add an OL element, and that sets up our ordered list. Now we need to add list items. So make a space, and inside we add an LI element. LI for list item. So now we'll copy over this and paste it in there. Now when we save, we've got our second level heading, and we're starting to see our numbered list come up. So let's add in a few more list items. And we'll add in the text for those. Now while we're at it, let's fill out the second section too. Now we're going to create another H2 element to create a subheading. And we'll add this text here into it. Now this time we don't want a list, this time we want paragraphs of text. So this is where we add in our P element. Now we're going to be adding in this text here. So we have 3 paragraphs. So we'll add in another 2 P elements. And then we'll copy in our text. Just tidy that up. All right, so now we've got the rest of our numbered list has shown up, another subheading, and now here are our 3 paragraphs. All right, so now let's fill out our aside. Now here, we're going to add some related links. First up, we're going to need another heading. Let's make this an H3 heading. And then we'll add in our heading text. Now these are the 2 links that we're going to want to put in. We're going to link through to the Mozilla Development Network element reference that I mentioned earlier. And this is the URL for it. And we're also going to link through to an extension for Chrome called the HTML5 outliner. And that's the URL for that. And we're going to put these links inside an unordered list this time. So rather than having numbers, we're just going to have a bullet list. So we'll add in a UL element. And just like before, we need list items. So we're going to put in 2 LI elements. And now we're ready to add in our links. And you'll recall from a previous lesson that to create a link, we need to use the A element. And A stands for anchor. So I'll hit A, and then in Sublime Text, you can hit Tab to complete this tag. And now you can paste in the first of these URLs. Then we'll grab the text that we want to apply this link to, and we'll paste it in between the opening and closing A tags. Now let's do the same thing for our second link. We'll add our A element, so press A and then Tab. Now we need to fill in the href attribute with the URL that we want this link to connect to. And then we'll add in our link text in between the opening and closing A tags. All right, now let's see what we've got. Okay, so now we have an H3 element down here, and you'll notice that the H1 heading is the largest, the H2 headings are a little smaller, and then the H3 heading is a little smaller again. And then down here in our aside, we've got our bullet list. You notice how we have bullets here and numbers here. And then we've got our links off to our element reference and this Chrome extension. And now finally, let's just add something into our footer. So first we'll set up a paragraph to hold the text that we're going to add to our footer. So we'll add in a P element, and then inside it, we're going to add a copyright notice. Now first we're going to add in a copyright symbol. And to do that, enter an ampersand, then the word copy, and then a semicolon. Then we'll make a space and we'll just put in the year. So let's save that and see what our footer looks like. All right, so there's our little copyright symbol and the year. So now there's only one element left that we went through in our list of common elements that we haven't used, and that is an image element. And I've just left that to last because you already covered working with image elements a little bit in a previous lesson. But to make sure that we have all of this complete, let's add an image element to illustrate our HTML essentials area. So just under here, where we're talking about using a dedicated code editor, we're going to include a screenshot of the code that you're working on here in Sublime Text. So add our image element. And then we're going to insert html.png as the file name for the image that we want to insert. And there we go. There's our image embedded into our site. So now just take a moment and sit back and look at what you've created. Now you've just created a complete HTML page from scratch. So if it seemed like coding was a little bit of an ominous prospect to take up, I hope that helps you realize that this is all well and truly within your grasp. So that wraps up the final lesson. I hope you'll join me in the last video for the course. We're just going to quickly recap everything that you've learned. And then I'm also going to let you know what's coming up in the course after this in our Start Here course series. So I'll see you in the last video. Congratulations, you've now completed Start Here, Learn HTML Basics. You've gone from starting with a blank slate, and now you've hand-coded your own HTML page with all of the most common HTML elements in it. So you learned what HTML was. You learned that it was a type of markup, and that markup is a way to add instructions to content. And in the case of HTML, those instructions tell a web browser how to display a web page. You learned that HTML is made up of elements, that elements are created by using tags, and that tags can have extra attributes to give them extra functionality. You learn what the most common HTML elements are so that you don't have to get overwhelmed by learning too much code all at once. And those elements that you just worked with can be used to create an infinite number of different types of websites. Now, this course has been the first in a series that's going to take you all the way through to knowing all of the most important things about web design. So you've got the HTML essentials down. Now in the next course, we're going to move on to working with CSS. Because when you pair CSS for styling with the HTML that you just learned in this course, that's when you really unlock the potential of web design. So in the next course, we're going to introduce you to working with CSS. You're going to learn exactly what CSS is, how it works, how it affects website display. You're going to learn things like what CSS selectors are, CSS properties, and you're going to learn about the syntax that you need to use when creating CSS. Now, this first course teaching you CSS is going to concentrate on typography. Now, the reason that we're going into typography first is the bulk of a website tends to be created of text. So one of the most important things that you need to get right in a website is making sure that text is easy to read, comfortable to read, enjoyable to read. And once you have your text right, then you can design all the rest of your website to harmonize with that optimized and readable typography. So in the next course, you'll learn about CSS font properties. You'll learn about using web-safe fonts and custom fonts, font stacks. You'll learn about how to control spacing with things like line height and margins. You'll learn about the types of units that you can use in typography. You'll learn more about controlling the display of heading tags and paragraph tags. And then we're going to take the web page that you just created at the end of this course, and we're going to style its typography based on everything that you learn in the next course. So look out for Start Here, Learn Typography CSS. So I hope you really enjoyed everything that you learned in this course, that you're feeling really proud of yourself for what you've done, and I hope that you're looking forward to learning more. So thanks for taking this course, and I'll see you in the next one.